turn to page 46 in your book. This is an example. This is an example of deflation right here. Page 46 in your book. You can see in the 1990s what was going on in Japan. These are Japanese lamb prices compared with the previous year. Every year it got cheaper. And every year Japan never came out of their economic problems. That's just a symptom. So let's go back, turn back a bit. Page 44. Don't be bullish when you're about to enter a depression. That's the concept. Well, how do you know? You look at the inflation rate or the deflation rate, and when deflation is extreme, that's bad. I want you to think about this. Here's the reason why it works the way it is. You got a bunch of businesses. You got a bunch of businesses, and they've got employees. And all of those employees have buying power. And then the businesses lay people off. Well, what becomes of that aggregate buying power? It declines because people are getting laid off. And so the manufacturers say, the employers say, you know what? We got to reduce prices because the buying power of the consumer is going down. Let's reduce prices. And you know what? In order to stay in business, I got to lay some people off. Just so I can keep the factory running with the existing employees that we've got. So they lay people off. Everybody lays people off. What happens to the aggregate buying power of the consumer? It goes down. And so what do the businesses do? You know what? We need to cut prices. We need to run lean and mean. We need to cut prices, and I got to lay people off. So what happens to the aggregate buying power of the consumer? It goes down, and the businesses say, I need to lay people. You know, you get the picture, right? It's exactly what's going on in the airlines now, isn't it? It's exactly. We need to lay people off, cut prices, lay people off, cut prices, lay people off, cut prices, go out of business. If they didn't have government bailouts, that's what would have happened by now, isn't it? So you get the picture, right? Declining prices is not good. And the country woke up to it in 2001 and 2002. So rapidly rising prices is also not good. But rapidly declining prices is bad. Everybody follow that? So we're going to look at the inflation rate and deflation rate. When deflation is extreme, it's bad. The other one is don't be bullish when the Fed is raising rates to a level that would hurt the economy. According to the Fed's own research, that would be the yield curve. When it's what we call inverted, it's bad. We'll define what's inverted. This is a graph right here. This is a graph of the inflation, the consumer price index, compared to its same level a year ago. Let me go to a couple of these websites and show you some stuff. Here's the Consumer Price Index homepage. We'll go to the report, and we'll get the summary. And here's the number that we need. The October CPI was 190.9. Now remember, we need that to be, let me turn to the page. If you turn to page 45 in your manual, when the CPI is more than 4% lower than it was the prior year, that's bad. And in fact, the CPI was actually, they even calculated for us, is 3.2% higher than it was the prior year. Now we're concerned about when it's 4% lower. So this one is fine. Everybody understand that? There is no deflation. In fact, we've got a little bit of a whiff of the other right now. But our concern is if this is 4% below the prior year level. So I just take that 190.9 compared to the prior year level and take a look at it. The nice thing is they go ahead and they say 4% higher. Now believe me, if they said 5% lower, I'd be having a panic attack right now. A big panic attack. That's pretty simple, isn't it? That's it. So let's turn to page, let's go to page 47. This is a graph of the yield curve. The yield curve measures the rate of interest at a certain point of a certain duration. Like this measures the 3-month, and then the 6-month, and then the 1 year, and 2 year, 3, 5, 7, 10, and 20. What we're concerned about is the 3-month and the 10-year. I'll give you the exact numbers here in just a minute. But this is what the November 14th, 2004, that's what a normal yield curve looks like. Now, if you look at September 1st, 2000, that's what an inverted yield curve looks like. It's where short-term rates are higher than long-term rates. That's bad. It's bad for the economy. Now, let's see. All right. What I want you to think about at this moment is think of yourself as a banker. We're going to put on our banking hats, right? If you are a banker, how do you make money as a banker? Perfectly said. You make money as a banker by loaning out money at a higher interest rate than you borrow the money. So where do banks get the money to make loans? They get it from depositors. So where do they get the deposits? The biggest source is probably checking accounts, right? A checking account is called a demand deposit. What that means is if you deposit the money in the bank today or Monday, Tuesday you can draw it out. So it's basically the bank has if everybody in the world did it, they basically are making an overnight loan. Thank goodness for the banks, not everybody does that, but you get my point. It's a demand deposit. It's an overnight loan to the bank. That's a really short-term rate, isn't it? Very short term. And then they take that money, and then what do? They loan it to homeowners, to people that are buying a house, and that's going to be what, a 15-year loan, a 30-year loan? If it's an ARM, sometimes those ARMs have rates that are locked for 3 to 5 years, and then they adjust after that. So banks borrow short term and loan long term. Does everybody follow that? Okay, I hope you do, because what this means is banks borrow here. This is their source of funds. They borrow short and they loan out here. Borrow short, loan long. Well, right now, banks are able to borrow. Anybody have a checking account with interest? Anybody have? What's it yielding right now? Any idea? You have, it's less than 1%? Okay, so they're borrowing at 1% and then making 15-year home mortgages at what? 6%? So they're borrowing at 1, loaning at 6. That's pretty good, isn't it? What's that mean the banks want to do? They want to make loans like mad, don't they? Because they've got that big, giant spread. Well, that's good. That's really good for the economy. But what happens? If interest rates go up enough, like they did in 2000, actually in 1999, it started in June of 1999 and continued all the way through 2000, which interest rates go up, the short-term rates go up, the long-term rates go up just a little bit. Now, banks borrow here at 6.5 and loan at, banks borrow at 6.5 and loan at 5.5. Well, can they make money? No. I mean, that's a way to go out of business, isn't it? Well, so what do they do? They stop making loans. It's kind of like, doctor, it hurts when I do that. Well, stop doing it. Mr. Regulator, I'm losing money making loans with this yield spread. Well, stop making loans. Right? So if the banks stop making loans, what happens? Houses don't get built. Factories don't get built. Office buildings don't get built. Casinos don't get built. You follow the logic here? That's why the yield curve works the way it does. If short-term rates climb to such a level that they exceed long-term rates, banks stop making loans, and you get what Greenspan euphemistically called a credit crunch. So that's the way it works. And, as you might imagine, the Fed has done studies and said, guess what? When the yield curve inverts, which it did on March 2000, the Fed started raising rates in 1999. And actually, let's take a look at the next page, 48. 48. This is a graph of the yield curve, and as it's described in your manual, it is the long-term rate divided by the short-term rate. All right, so it's long-term rate divided by short-term rate. And what we do, the yield curve is normal when that ratio, long-term divided by short-term, when that ratio is above 1, yield curve is positive. When its long-term rate divided by short-term rate is less than 1, the yield curve is inverted. And what you'll notice is this is what you should be looking for in this graph. Here's a period where the yield curve inverted. This is 1979. 1980, we go into a recession. Yield curve gets normal, inverts again. 1982, we go into a recession. Yield curve inverts in 1989. A year later, we go into a recession. Here, 1999, yield curve inverts. 2000, we go into, 2000, the yield curve inverts. In 2000, the yield curve inverts. In 2001, we go into recession. The thing that's interesting to note is that it doesn't matter who was president, what party, who ran Congress, what the tax policy was. It all came down to yield curve inverts, a year later, 6 months later, recession. Everybody follow that? And guess what? I can take this same graph and I can go back the same exact principle. I can go back to 1930 and it works the same way. I can take the exact same principle and take it from the United States and put it in Victorian England, and it works the same way. I've actually got the data going back to 1694 in, you think I'm exaggerating. I am not exaggerating. I've got inflation back to 1204 for England, but 1694, I've got 1800 in the United States, 1694 in England. And guess what? Yield curve inverts. Guess what you get? Recession.